The storm broke over East Texas, 1842. Lightning cut the sky like a whip. Rain hammered the earth, turning the fields into rivers of mud. 10 bodies lay scattered in the dirt, faces half buried, whips still clutched in their lifeless hands. A hymn floated in the air, low, trembling, almost tender. He didn't beg. He didn't run. The firelight from the burning barn painted shadows that danced over the corpses. Somewhere in the dark, chains rattled. By dawn, rumors would spread like wildfire. 10 men executed before the sun rose. But whose voice had commanded the hymn? The morning after the storm, mist hung low across the sugar fields. The smell of wet molasses clung to the air, sweet and rotting at once. Samuel Harlow sat hunched over his desk in the plantation office, ink-stained fingers drumming the edge of a ledger. He was a thin man, prematurely balding, eyes darting like a rabbit's. Every page he turned seemed to shake his hand. Martha, his wife, leaned against the doorway, her shawl pulled tight. "You didn't sleep," Samuel glanced up. "Could you? After last night?" Her eyes shifted toward the window, where laborers trudged through the fields, faces blank, songs hushed. "They know something," she whispered. "They always know something," Samuel muttered, dipping his quill into the ink pot. "But it's not our place. Write the numbers, balance the books." "That's my duty." Martha stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I heard them," Samuel, singing in the dark. It wasn't a work song, it was different. He pressed the quill harder than he meant to. A blot of ink bled across the page. He swore softly. "You should keep your ears to yourself, Martha." "I can't," she replied, almost desperate. "Every night I see shadows moving past the barn. And last night, before the storm, one of them was standing in the fields. Just standing there, staring toward the big house. I swear, Samuel, he wasn't afraid of the lightning. He welcomed it." Samuel's mouth went dry. He forced a laugh. "You and your stories. They've always sung strange things. Moses, Pharaoh, rivers parting, harmless songs." But even as he said it, his mind replayed the sound, the low hum that carried through the shutters when the storm raged. It wasn't harmless. It was deliberate. Outside, an overseer's whistle shrilled. Men bent double under the weight of wet cane. Whips cracked, though slower than usual. A nervous silence floated in the air between each lash. Samuel looked back down at his ledger. Work must go on. Martha didn't move. Her eyes lingered on him, pale and searching. "What if it doesn't?" she asked softly. He lifted his head. "What do you mean? What if the work stops?" The question hung like smoke. Samuel set down his quill and rubbed his temples. "Don't say such things. Not here." His voice cracked. But through the window, he caught sight of a young man, shoulders broad, scarred hands gripping the cane knife not like a tool, but like a weapon. Samuel blinked and the figure was gone into the rows of green. He shivered. The plantation looked the same as it always had, orderly, disciplined, eternal. But the silence was heavier than the fog, and Samuel knew something beneath the soil was shifting. The hymn from the night before echoed faintly in his skull. And Martha, standing in the doorway, whispered the words that Samuel could not bring himself to say aloud. "They're waiting." The cane fields baked under the noon sun, the air thick with sugar and sweat. Chains rattled with every step. A boy's hand, scarred across the palm, tightened around the rough handle of a basket. Caleb, barely 12, yet his shoulders carried the weight of a grown man's labor. The scar was old, from the day he had stolen a crust of bread and been caught. It had healed jagged, as if the skin itself had remembered the punishment. Beside him, Ruth bent low, her fingers moving quick through the stalks. She was older by 3 years, her voice steady even in the heat. She hummed a lullaby, soft and trembling, just loud enough for Caleb to hear. "You'll work faster if you keep the song in your head," she whispered. "I don't need songs," Caleb muttered, but his jaw softened at the sound. The lullaby was theirs alone, a secret comfort stitched between hunger and fear. The crack of a whip split the air. Overseer Thomas Calhoun swaggered down the rows, silver flask glinting at his belt. His face was red from whiskey, eyes sharp with cruelty. He was a man who relished the sight of backs bending and knees buckling. "Faster," he barked, slashing the whip against the cane stalks. Caleb froze, his scarred hand trembling around the basket. Ruth stepped forward, shielding him without thinking. "He's only a boy," she said. Calhoun's grin was slow, poisonous. Then he'll learn like a man. The whip cracked again, this time across Ruth's shoulder. She staggered but did not fall. Caleb's chest heaved. His fingers curled into fists. Calhoun leaned close, the stench of whiskey spilling from his mouth. "You protect him again, girl, and I'll see you whipped until you forget his name." Ruth bit her lip, eyes flashing but silent. Caleb could not move, could not breathe. The scar on his hand burned as if newly cut. That night, when the fields lay in silence, Caleb sat by the faint fire outside the quarters. Ruth's shoulder was raw and bleeding. She rocked gently, humming the same lullaby. "You shouldn't have done that," Caleb said, voice hoarse. "And let him break you?" Ruth whispered. "No, better he marks me than destroys you." "I'll never forgive him," Ruth's gaze softened. "Forgiveness isn't for men like Calhoun. But you must be careful. You must outlast him." From the shadows, another voice spoke. A raspy old man, faceless in the dark. "Outlast him, yes. Or outlive him." The words struck Caleb like a stone. He looked down at his scar, tracing its crooked path. In the distance, Calhoun's drunken laughter carried across the fields, flask clinking against his belt. Caleb whispered into the night, too soft for Ruth to hear. "One day, that flask will fall from his hand." The lullaby wove itself through the darkness, steady as a heartbeat. The boy who carried a scar was no longer just a child. Something had begun to harden inside him. The quarters breathed with hushed voices after dusk. The smell of wood smoke drifted in, mixed with sweat and damp earth. In one corner, Joseph sat on a stool, coaxing a thin, mournful tune from a harmonica. His broad frame leaned forward, shoulders slumped, eyes closed. Each note hung like a question in the air. Caleb, now older, listened with restless energy. "You ever play it to the overseers?" he asked. Joseph cracked one eye open. "What, the harmonica? Ain't for their ears. This sounds for us. They'd never understand." "They don't understand words either," Caleb muttered. Joseph gave a short laugh. "That's why we hide 'em. Songs say what mouths can't. You'll learn." Ruth sat nearby, mending a torn shirt, humming her lullaby without thinking. Caleb's jaw tightened at the sound. Beautiful and cruel at once, a reminder of Calhoun's whip. "You still hear it when you sleep?" Joseph asked, watching him. "Every night," Caleb admitted. His eyes burned. "But one day I'll make him hear something different." Joseph shook his head, the harmonica clutched like a relic. "Don't let fire eat you whole, boy. Faith is enough." But Caleb's silence said otherwise. The door creaked. Lydia slipped inside, balancing a bundle of fabric. Her hands were quick, deft, her eyes glancing toward Caleb before settling on her work. She was the seamstress of the quarters, and whispers followed her about the way she could stitch beauty even from scraps. Caleb watched as she pulled a strip of red ribbon from the bundle and wound it around her wrist before tucking it away under her sleeve. "What's that for?" he asked. "Nothing," she said lightly. "Just a ribbon," Joseph smirked. "Red looks like fire. It looks like blood," Ruth murmured. Not looking up from her mending, Lydia's smile flickered, but her gaze met Caleb's. Sometimes blood is the price for something worth keeping. Later, when the others had drifted into the night, Caleb lingered by the door. Lydia stood alone, folding scraps into neat piles. "You carry that ribbon like a secret," Caleb said softly. "And you carry a scar like a brand," she replied without turning. He stepped closer. "Scars remind us." She looked at him then, her eyes sharp but kind. "Ribbons remind us too, of what we choose, not just what they take." Caleb swallowed hard. He wanted to reach for her hand but didn't. Instead, Lydia pressed a small folded square of fabric into his palm. "A pocket," she explained. "Sewn inside your shirt. 4 letters, or prayers, or something you don't want found." He traced the stitches with his scarred fingers. "Why would you give me this?" "Because you're carrying more than you let on." Her voice was steady, but he felt the weight behind it. Weeks passed. Caleb's sermons began in whispers, words from the Bible twisted into something stronger. He spoke of Moses and Pharaoh, of seas parting, of chains breaking. The men leaned closer. The women closed their eyes, their lips moving with his. One night, Lydia stood among them, her red ribbon glinting faintly under the firelight. Her eyes never left his. Joseph pulled Caleb aside after the gathering. "You're walking a thin line." "It's not a line," Caleb replied. It's a road. A road leads somewhere. You know where this one goes? Caleb didn't answer. His scar itched, his chest burned, his eyes found Lydia's across the fire, but shadows lengthened around them. Ruth overheard a conversation near the big house, Calhoun boasting to another overseer, flask swinging at his side. Got new shackles coming from New Orleans, he said with a grin. Special made. To silence a preacher? Ruth froze in the darkness. Her hands clutched the broken doll she always carried, wood worn smooth from years of holding. She whispered a prayer under her breath, but her eyes filled with dread. The lullaby she hummed that night was slower, heavier, as though she already knew something was ending. And Caleb, listening, clenched the stitched pocket against his chest. He had begun to believe that fire might be the only hymn strong enough to answer chains. The sun bore down like judgment itself. The quarters had been emptied into the yard, men and women lined in silence. Chains clinked faintly. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Caleb stood in the center, wrists bound, shirt torn at the shoulder. His scarred palm twitched against the rope. Overseer Calhoun swaggered forward, silver flask flashing at his belt. He uncoiled the whip with practiced ease, the leather curling like a snake. His grin spread wide, teeth stained by whiskey. "Preacher boy," he drawled. "Think you can stir up the lambs? Think you can play Moses?" Caleb lifted his chin. His voice, though cracked, carried across the yard. "I only told them the Lord will set us free." The crowd stirred. Calhoun spat into the dirt. "The Lord don't live here. I do." He raised the whip. The crack split the air and Caleb's back arched with the blow. Ruth cried out, pushing against the guards, but a heavy hand shoved her down. Lydia's breath hitched, her red ribbon hidden beneath her sleeve, clenched so tight it left a mark. Calhoun struck again. The lash cut deep. Caleb gasped, but his words spilled out between breaths. "You can break my back, but you'll never chain my voice." The crowd held its breath. A new voice cut through the silence. Smooth, gentle, false. "Brother Calhoun, let mercy temper your hand." All eyes turned. Reverend Elias Moore approached, his black coat spotless despite the dust, an ivory cross glinting at his chest. His hair was neatly combed, his Bible tucked under his arm. His words dripped like honey, but his eyes were cold. "Discipline is righteous," Moore said softly, "but so is the shepherd's staff. The boy's misguided, not wicked." Calhoun sneered. "Misguided? He's dangerous." Reverend Moore's smile flickered toward the crowd. "Dangerous ideas must be corrected, yes, but the lash alone cannot cure blasphemy. The soul must be humbled." He turned to Caleb, voice rising like a sermon. "You twist scripture, boy. You preach rebellion, not salvation. Do you think the Lord blesses your insolence?" Caleb coughed, blood at his lip. His eyes met Moore's. "The Lord blesses the enslaved, not the chains." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Calhoun raised the whip again, but Moore lifted his hand. "Enough. The boy has learned." Calhoun's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, rolling the whip back with a curse. The overseer's pleasure soured by being denied his full cruelty. Moore bent closer to Caleb, voice low, meant only for him. "I will not see Pharaoh fall because of a child's fire. I will silence you with prayer, if not the rope." Caleb's body trembled with pain, but his gaze did not waver. "Then you will hear me in your sleep, even if my mouth is shut." Moore's smile returned, thin and cold. He rose, addressing the crowd once more. "Go back to your work. Remember, obedience is the true path to heaven." The people dispersed, whispers trailing like smoke. Ruth knelt beside Caleb, tears streaking her face. Lydia pressed a rag to his wounds, her hands steady though her chest shook. "You should have bowed your head," Ruth whispered fiercely. "No," Caleb rasped. His blood soaked the earth beneath him. He pressed his palm into its scar against soil. "If God won't free us, we'll free ourselves." The words sank into the silence, heavier than chains. From the shadows, Joseph watched, harmonica silent at his lips. His eyes narrowed. He had seen faith ignite before, but this flame felt different, dangerous. And somewhere beyond the fields, Calhoun's laughter carried, mingling with the faint clink of his silver flask. Night pressed heavy over the quarters. The cicadas sang, a hollow chorus against the crack of distant whips. Inside a broken cabin, a single candle guttered, its light stretching shadows long across the splintered walls. Caleb lay on his side, back bandaged with torn cloth. Every movement sent fire through his body, but his eyes blazed clear, refusing rest. Ruth sat beside him, grinding herbs into a paste, her hands trembling only when she paused to breathe. "You'll tear yourself open," she whispered. "I'd rather bleed standing than live crawling," Caleb muttered. His voice was hoarse but steady. Lydia knelt close, smoothing the cloth over his wound. Her red ribbon peeked from her sleeve, glowing like defiance in the candlelight. She leaned close, voice sharp with urgency. "They watch you now. Moore calls you dangerous. Calhoun wants an excuse to finish what he started. You cannot stand in the yard again." Caleb grimaced as he sat upright, ignoring the pain. "Then I won't stand in the yard. I'll move in the dark." A silence settled. Ruth's pestle stilled in the bowl. Joseph leaned against the doorframe, harmonica dangling from his fingers. He had been quiet, eyes fixed on the flame. "You speak of moving in the dark," Joseph said slowly, "but shadows carry echoes. A whisper becomes thunder if the wrong ears hear it." Caleb's gaze snapped to him. "Then we whisper only to those who will not betray," Ruth frowned. "And who decides that, you? Trust is thin as paper here. One word in the wrong mouth." "We've been waiting for Moses," Caleb interrupted, his voice raw. "But maybe the Lord waits for us to stop waiting. Maybe he's given us hands not to fold but to fight." Lydia's breath caught. "And if we fail? Then let our chains rattle loud enough to wake heaven itself," Caleb answered. The candle sputtered. For a moment, the flame seemed to bow low, then rose again. Joseph stepped inside, tossing his harmonica onto the table. The metal clinked against wood. "You're asking for blood. Don't dress it in scripture. Say it plain." Caleb's eyes met his. His blood." The word hung heavy. From outside, footsteps scraped. The group froze. Ruth blew out the candle, plunging them into dark. The door creaked open, moonlight spilling across the floor. A figure stepped inside, an old woman with bent back and eyes like coals, known to all as Granny Mercy. Her hands smelled of smoke and iron. She had once tended the big house fires. Now she tended memories. "You think you're the first to dream this dream?" she whispered, voice thin as thread. "I've buried men who thought chains could be broken with teeth alone. Fire must be fed, yes, but it must also be hidden until it is ready." Caleb bowed his head. "Then guide us." Mercy's lips curled in a sad smile. "I can give you roots and herbs. I can teach you silence. But the day you choose, remember, children, once the fire starts, it does not stop until all is ash." Her words lingered like smoke in the cabin. Caleb pressed his scarred palm against the table. "Then let us learn to feed it." The group sat in silence, shadows thick around them, the first seeds of rebellion planted beneath the weight of night. The days crawled forward, each one edged with fear. Overseer Calhoun's whistle sliced the mornings like a blade. Men bent their backs harder than ever, while the whip cracked as if it needed no excuse. Caleb worked with slow precision, his scarred palm hidden beneath a rag. His eyes moved more than his hands, counting who looked away, who lingered near. Every nod, every silence became a signal. At dusk, he met Ruth and Lydia by the well. The air reeked of damp earth and sweat, the buckets creaking as they rose from water. Ruth leaned close, her voice barely audible. "I left the bundle by the elm. Herbs enough to cloud a man's mind if slipped in his whiskey." Lydia glanced around, clutching her ribboned sleeve. "If anyone sees you, they won't." Ruth cut her off, though her jaw was tight. "I move quiet." The scrape of boots interrupted them. Thomas Calhoun stepped into view, a flask swinging from his hand. His mouth curled into that cruel smile that stank of whiskey. Well, he drawled. "Prayers by the well? Or gossip?" Caleb straightened, eyes cold. "Just working, sir." Calhoun stepped closer, breath sour. He tapped his whip against his thigh, slow, deliberate. "I see the way you whisper, preacher. Whispers grow into trouble." The silence stretched until Lydia, trembling, dropped the bucket. The water splashed, breaking the tension. Calhoun smirked, lifted his flask, and sauntered off, muttering, "Trouble always drowns itself." Only when he vanished into the dark did Ruth exhale. "He watches too close. He smells it," Caleb muttered. "But suspicion is not proof." "Not yet." That night in the cabin, Granny Mercy traced symbols in ash across the floor. Her voice hummed low like wind through reeds. Joseph sat sharpening a rusted blade, each scrape loud in the silence. "You carry too many eyes on your shoulders," Joseph said without looking up. "One misstep and all of us swing for it." "Then we don't misstep," Caleb replied. Mercy looked up, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. "Chains do not break from one strike. They weaken link by link. You must strike quiet before you strike loud. Lydia shivered. And if someone betrays us? The word hung heavy. Ruth's gaze dropped to her hands stained with herbs. Then the fire eats them first. The candle flickered. Outside, a dog barked, then another, until the night howled with warning. Joseph sheathed the blade and muttered, "The hounds smell something, and they're never wrong." Caleb pressed his palm to the table, scar burning as though alive. Then let them smell. By the time they see the fire, it will be too late. The cabin fell into silence, the weight of both hope and doom pressing into every breath. The night came without stars. Clouds smothered the sky, and the air hung heavy as though even the heavens waited, listening. Inside the cabin, the conspirators gathered. Caleb stood at the center, sweat glistening across his brow despite the chill. His scarred palm gripped a rusted blade, its edge dull but steady. Ruth held her pouch of herbs, the smell of crushed roots and bitter smoke clinging to her dress. Lydia's red ribbon was tied tight at her wrist, trembling with her pulse. Joseph's harmonica rested on the table, silent, but his other hand clutched the sharpened knife he'd carried all week. Granny Mercy bent over the fire pit, sprinkling ash and whispering words too old for the others to understand. Caleb's voice cut through the crackle of flame. "Tonight, we decide if chains rattle or if they break." The others looked at him, faces pale with fear, yet burning with something stronger. Ruth spoke first. "We slip it into their drink at the barn. They'll be slow, weak. Then we strike." Lydia whispered, "If we are caught, then we are caught together." Caleb finished. His eyes found hers, fierce yet tender. "Better to die on our feet than live on our knees." The door creaked open. A gust of wind rushed in, carrying the sound of distant laughter. Overseers celebrating in the barn, their voices echoing through the night. Caleb lifted his blade. "It begins." The barn roared with firelight and whiskey. Overseer Calhoun laughed loudest, his face red, flask swinging wild. He slapped the table, spilling liquor, his whip coiled by his boots. Moore sat beside him, quieter, eyes cold as steel. Around them, the others drank deep, the smell of sweat, hay, and spirits mixing into a thick haze. Ruth moved first, sliding through the shadows with the tray of jugs. Her hands shook, but she poured smooth, whispering to herself like prayer. A pinch of herb in each flask, bitter enough to sicken, slow, confuse. Calhoun grabbed his drink, sloshing half down his shirt before gulping the rest. "To the devil who made chains," he bellowed. The others roared their agreement, slamming mugs against wood. From outside, Caleb watched through a crack in the boards, his chest pounding. He felt the burn of his scar like fire spreading through his veins. Joseph stood beside him, blade ready. Within minutes, the overseer's laughter soured into coughing. One by one they stumbled, blinking heavy, voices slurring. Moore frowned, his hand reaching for his pistol, but his fingers fumbled against the holster. Caleb pushed the door open. It groaned loud, silencing the barn. He stepped inside, blade catching the light. Calhoun staggered to his feet, whip in hand, eyes narrowing through the fog of herbs. "Preacher boy," he growled, swaying. "Come to sermonize?" Caleb's voice was low, steady. "No sermon, just judgment." Joseph slipped in behind him, knife flashing. Ruth entered from the side, clutching the pouch tight. Lydia hesitated at the door, ribbon trembling before stepping forward. Granny Mercy stood outside, her shadow cast against the barn wall, humming low as if the earth itself listened. Calhoun cracked his whip, the sound splitting the air. The lash missed wide, hitting a lantern. Flames burst against the hay. The barn began to burn. Chaos erupted. Overseers stumbled, some reaching for weapons, others too weak to stand. Moore managed to draw his pistol, firing a wild shot that splintered wood near Caleb's head. Lydia screamed. Caleb lunged, blade driving into Moore's chest. The overseer gasped, eyes wide, pistol clattering to the ground. Blood seeped slow across his shirt as he collapsed, staring up at Caleb with disbelief. "Chains break tonight," Caleb whispered. Calhoun roared, charging through smoke, whip lashing. He caught Joseph across the arm, tearing flesh. Joseph snarled, swinging his knife, cutting Calhoun's face open. Blood streamed, mixing with sweat and liquor. "Devil spawn," Calhoun spat, swinging again. The lash wrapped Caleb's wrist, ripping the blade free. Calhoun yanked, dragging him down. For a moment, the fire crackled louder than the screams, shadows twisting across their faces. Lydia darted forward, seizing the blade from the ground. Her ribbon streaked red with blood and firelight. She drove the knife into Calhoun's side. He staggered, eyes wide, disbelief cracking his drunken rage. Caleb ripped the whip free and wrapped it around Calhoun's throat. He pulled hard. The overseer clawed, choking, gasping, stumbling as the fire spread around them. His boots slipped in spilled whiskey, his body crashing against the table. With one final heave, Caleb yanked and Calhoun fell, neck snapping with a sickening crack. The barn thundered with fire. Flames licked high, devouring wood and flesh alike. Overseers coughed, screamed, some crawling toward the door only to be dragged back into smoke. Ruth threw her pouch into the blaze, the herbs exploding into bitter fumes. Joseph grabbed Caleb's arm, shouting over the roar, "We have to go!" Caleb's chest heaved, eyes locked on Calhoun's lifeless body. He whispered almost to himself, "Judgment is done." Lydia tugged his sleeve, eyes wet, voice shaking. "Please, before the fire takes us too." They stumbled out into the night, coughing, eyes stinging. Behind them, the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, the fire devouring every beam, every body. Screams turned to silence, then to the roar of flames alone. The conspirators stood together in the field, faces lit by the inferno. Chains clinked faintly from their ankles, but in the firelight they looked like crowns of steel. Granny Mercy's humming grew louder, rising above the crackle. Her voice was thin, trembling, but carried through the night like prophecy. The fire has begun. It will not stop until all is ash. The barn groaned one last time before collapsing entirely, sparks leaping toward the heavens as though even the stars could not look away. Caleb dropped to his knees, chest heaving, scarred palm pressed against the earth. His voice was hoarse but unbroken. "We are free in the fire," he whispered, "even if we burn with it." Morning came with smoke still hanging over the fields. The barn was nothing but blackened beams and smoldering hay. Crows circled overhead, their cries slicing the silence. The ground reeked of ash and blood, mingled with the bitter stench of burnt whiskey. Caleb stood at the edge of the ruins, his chest bare, eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. His scarred palm ached as though it had carried the fire itself. Ruth crouched near the ashes, sifting with her fingers until she found a twisted buckle of iron. She held it up, face pale. "Proof," she whispered. "They will come looking." Joseph staggered forward, his arm wrapped in bloodied cloth. "They'll come with dogs, guns, more chains than you can count." His voice cracked. "We've lit a fire we can't put out." Granny Mercy's eyes glowed like embers in her wrinkled face. No fire was ever meant to be put out. It burns until it finishes its work. By midday, the plantation boiled with panic. The master's family had been roused by riders from neighboring lands. Horses thundered, men with rifles flooding the yard, faces tight with fear. Overseer Calhoun's body was dragged from the ruins, neck twisted, eyes frozen in shock. Moore's corpse was laid beside him, pistol still clutched in stiff fingers. The master's wife wept into a kerchief, her children clinging to her skirts. A preacher from town arrived, shaking his head, murmuring of sin and damnation. Soldiers shouted orders, corralling the enslaved into the yard. Chains rattled like drums of judgment. One soldier spat into the dirt. 10 dead. Poison in their cups, blades in their chests. Barn burned to the ground. "Devil's work," the master, pale and trembling, whispered. It was the preacher. "That Caleb, I should have sold him years ago," the soldier sneered. "You should have killed him years ago." By evening, the hunt had begun. Hounds tore through the fields, their howls cutting across the night. Men with torches scoured the woods. The conspirators moved like shadows, slipping through swamps and thickets. Lydia stumbled often, her red ribbon streaked with ash. Caleb held her hand, dragging her forward, whispering, "Just a little further, just one more step." Ruth lagged behind, clutching her pouch, though it was empty now. Her breath wheezed. "They'll find us. I can hear it, the hounds. They don't lose the scent." Joseph cursed, clutching his wounded arm. "Then let them find me. Better to turn with a knife than die running." "No," Caleb hissed. His eyes burned in the moonlight. "We live or their deaths mean nothing." Granny Mercy stopped suddenly, pressing her ear to the earth. "Listen." The group froze. Beneath the wind and the dogs, they heard it, the distant rumble of hooves. "Riders closing in. We can't outrun both," Lydia whispered. Caleb looked at the swamp ahead, black water gleaming. He nodded. "Then we don't outrun. We vanish." They slipped into the mire, water swallowing them to the waist. Mosquitoes swarmed. Mud sucked at their legs. The night closed in around them, and the hounds howled closer. At dawn, soldiers dragged 2 men from the swamp. Joseph and another rebel, faces bruised, bodies broken. The others had slipped further into the dark, leaving only whispers of their passage. The trial came swift, if it could be called that. Joseph was hauled before the plantation yard, shackled, bleeding. A crowd gathered, masters, soldiers, the enslaved forced to watch. The preacher from town stood with his Bible, voice booming. "The wages of sin is death." The master raised his hand, trembling. "Hang him!" Joseph spat blood into the dirt. His voice rang out, cracked but unbroken. Better to swing free than bow-bound. They tied the rope around his neck. The crowd was silent, save for the creak of wood. Joseph's harmonica, taken from his pocket, was tossed into the dirt. It glinted once in the sun before disappearing into mud. The trap snapped. His body jerked, stilled. The chains rattled no more. "In the quarters," the enslaved whispered. Some spoke of Caleb's fire as madness. Others called it courage. Mothers hushed their children with lullabies, hiding trembling hands. Old men stared into flames, muttering, "The world has changed. Blood has spoken." One boy picked up Joseph's fallen harmonica. He pressed it to his lips and blew a soft, trembling note. It quivered through the air, carrying sorrow and defiance in equal measure. The soldiers never found Caleb, Lydia, Ruth, or Mercy. Some swore they drowned in the swamp. Others whispered they fled north, guided by stars, carrying the fire in their hearts. Every telling grew different. Sometimes Caleb strangled Calhoun with chains of iron. Sometimes Lydia slit his throat with the red ribbon itself. Some claimed Ruth brewed poison so bitter it killed a man before the cup left his lips. What mattered was not the detail, but the fear. The master spoke of it with dread. The enslaved spoke of it in secret with trembling hope. And always the story spread. Fire in the barn, chains snapping, a preacher's scarred hand raised to the sky. By the end of the season, the plantation stood quieter than ever. Overseers walked with rifles always at hand. Dogs prowled day and night. And still in the dark of the cabins, whispers rose like smoke. He didn't beg. He didn't run. They burned their chains in the fire. Judgment came. The silence of the fields was no longer peace. It was waiting. Years passed, but the smoke of that night never cleared. The barn was rebuilt, larger, stronger, with iron hinges and locks. Yet the ground beneath it still smelled faintly of ash when the rains came, as though the earth itself refused to forget. Among the enslaved, the story lived like a song. It was never sung the same way twice, but always with the same refrain: fire, blood, and chains breaking. Mothers rocked their children with lullabies that began softly, then grew sharper, fiercer. "Sleep, little one, the fire will guard you. Sleep, little one, the preacher will free you." In some tellings, Caleb was not a man at all, but an angel cloaked in flame, sent to punish the wicked. In others, he was a devil who struck down masters with poisoned words. But always, his scarred hand was raised high. The mark of rebellion burned into his flesh. Lydia's red ribbon became its own legend. Some said she strangled Calhoun with it, wrapping the silk until his face turned black. Others swore she dipped it in his blood and waved it as a banner when the barn fell. Children tied scraps of cloth around their wrists, calling it the ribbon of freedom, even when it earned them the whip. Ruth was remembered as the witch of herbs. They said her pouch could kill 10 men with a pinch or heal a wound with the same hand. In whispers, women traded dried leaves and powders, pretending it was medicine, though all knew it was memory of her craft. Joseph's harmonica, buried in the mud of the yard, became a relic. Boys pressed lips to rusted tin, blowing sour notes that made elders weep. Old men swore they heard his last breath in those sounds, the music of defiance. And Granny Mercy, she was said never to have died. Children believed she walked the fields at night, her eyes glowing like embers, humming to the restless dead. Overseers mocked the tale, but none dared linger alone after dark. The white masters spoke differently. For them, the rebellion was no song but a warning. "Do not let the preacher rise," they told one another. "Cut down the tongue before it speaks fire." Their wives clutched their children close, muttering prayers, their fear seeping into sermons and laws. New codes were written: no gatherings after dark, no reading, no preaching without permission. Dogs were doubled, whips lengthened, chains thickened. The barn's ashes became not a scar but a threat, proof that fire could catch anywhere, even in the heart of a plantation. Yet the harsher the law, the sharper the whisper. Travelers carried the tale further than the fields. In towns, men spoke of the burning barn over pints of ale, shaking their heads. Some dismissed it as madness. Others leaned close and whispered, "Maybe madness is what justice looks like when hope is gone." In the North, abolitionist papers printed fragments of the story, twisting it into speeches. They poisoned their oppressors. They burned the symbol of slavery to the ground. Names blurred, dates shifted, but the fire was always there. Even years later, when war clouds gathered, soldiers carried the tale like a banner. A preacher with a scarred hand, a red ribbon in the fire, a song blown through rusted tin. And so the story lived 2 lives. To the masters, it was a nightmare, proof of savagery and the need for control. To the enslaved, it was a promise that chains could rattle, that barns could burn, that even in silence, a whisper could one day roar. Every telling twisted truth into myth, but the heart remained. He didn't beg. He didn't run. He lit the fire, and the fire never died. The burning barn is long gone, its timbers swallowed by time, its ashes scattered by storms and seasons. Yet the story it left behind is heavier than any ruin. What do we call it? A crime? A rebellion? A sermon set in fire and blood? The answer depends on where one stands. For the masters, it was proof of chaos, savagery, the need for harsher chains. For the enslaved, it was something else entirely. A spark of dignity in a world built on cruelty. History often prefers silence when faced with such acts. It records numbers, dates, and punishments, but not the pounding of a heart. Not the cry that broke through the night. Yet to strip away the humanity is to strip away the truth. Was Caleb a hero or a murderer? Was Lydia a martyr or an avenger? Was Ruth's herb a sin or a weapon of war? Perhaps the truth is this: they were all human, driven to a line where silence meant death and defiance meant freedom, if only for a breath. The fire in that barn was not just wood and straw. It was centuries of suffering erupting in a single night. And though the smoke has long drifted into the sky, the question remains smoldering. When injustice is endless, what then is justice? The night ended, but the echoes did not. The barn was gone, the masters rebuilt, the survivors endured. Yet something had shifted, quietly, dangerously, forever. This was not just the tale of one plantation. It was the shadowed heartbeat of an entire era, an age built on chains, silence, and unrecorded screams. And in that silence, the enslaved carved messages of defiance, in whispers, in poison, in flames. History books rarely honor them. Court records erase them, owners cursed them, but their choices, terrible, brave, complicated, were seeds of resistance. Seeds that one day would grow into storms strong enough to shatter empires. The barn may have burned to the ground, but the memory endures, carried like an ember through generations, and every ember has the power to spark again. You've been watching the slave resistance, where forgotten voices rise and buried truths are unearthed. If this story gripped you, share it, carry it, let it breathe. Because history is not past, it is a mirror. And in its reflection, we must decide, do we remain silent or do we speak? Until next time, stay watchful, stay relentless, and never forget the fire.